You usually think of a city under siege as uh, this terrifying external problem. Like you imagine the enemy massing in the distance, the battering rams, the dust kicking up on the horizon.
Right, because you can actually see it coming.
Exactly. The threat is obvious.
Yeah.
Everyone inside the walls knows exactly what they're up against. But imagine a scenario that is just so much more unnerving.
Okay.
Imagine knowing the enemy is out there, but the watchmen, like the specific people whose entire job description is to stand on the wall, look at the horizon, and blow the warning horn, are just strolling around the battlements telling everyone down below to go back to sleep.
Wow. Yeah, that changes things entirely.
Right. They see the swords, they see the impending disaster, and they just consciously decide to mute the alarm.
I mean, it completely shatters the social contract. The danger isn't just the invading army anymore. The most immediate danger is the betrayal happening inside your own watchtower, you know?
Exactly.
You're being lulled into this false sense of security by the very people you pay to protect you.
And that profound, agonizing sense of betrayal is really the pulse of what we're exploring in today's deep dive. We're jumping into a highly intense, uh, utterly fascinating collection of prophetic writings authored by a figure who simply goes by the last witness.
Yeah, and the texts themselves have these really heavy, evocative titles.
They do. Titles like The Scroll of Empty Books
Yeah.
and The Weariness of Many Books.
The language is incredibly dense and it's fiery. At its core, this collection is a searing indictment of institutional and religious leadership.
Yeah.
The author is basically dissecting the extreme danger of leaders who prioritize their own wealth, status, and comfort over telling the truth. And it ultimately builds to a very stark prophecy of impending judgment for those leaders.
Now, just to set the table for you listening, these texts deal with highly charged religious and political themes. The author does not pull punches.
No, not at all.
They explicitly condemn leaders, massive institutions, entire nations. So as we go through this, we are functioning strictly as your impartial guides. We aren't here to validate the specific theology, and we certainly aren't taking political sides.
Right, we're just analyzing the text itself.
Exactly. Our goal today is to dissect the architecture of this argument, to understand the claims being made in the source material, and to see why this author believes the systems we trust are fundamentally broken. So to kick us off, what happens when the people appointed to sound the alarm are the ones putting the city to sleep?
Well, the architecture of that argument starts with a very specific, blistering accusation. The text directs its initial fury at a group it calls the shepherds of the assemblies.
Okay, let's unpack this. Who are these shepherds?
So the imagery it uses is incredibly sharp. It pulls from ancient prophetic traditions to describe these leaders as blind watchmen.
Blind watchmen.
Yeah, and silent dogs unable to bark. That's a direct reference to Isaiah 56.9.
I want to pause on that specific phrase. Silent dogs unable to bark. That is such a vivid, almost disturbing image.
It really is. Think about the psychology of it. A guard dog that won't bark is actually worse than having no dog at all.
Because you drop your guard.
Exactly. If you have no dog, you might lock your doors a little tighter, right? You stay vigilant. But if you have a massive guard dog sleeping on your porch, you leave the door unlocked. You assume you're safe.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
The last witness is arguing that these shepherds see the danger approaching the text, literally says the sword stands at the gate, but they absolutely refuse to warn the flock.
It's almost like, imagine you're staying in a luxury high-rise, and the building is smoldering. The building managers have this state-of-the-art fire alarm system, but they intentionally mute it because the sound of the alarm might disturb the VIP guests in the penthouse.
That is a perfect analogy.
Right, like they don't want to ruin the ambiance or cause a panic that might hurt their reputation, so they just let the smoke fill the hallways.
And they do it while telling everyone the air conditioning is just acting up.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is that the text notes these leaders actively preach comfort. They heal the wounds of the people superficially. It references Jeremiah 6.14, saying they walk around preaching peace, peace, when there is absolutely no peace.
They're just selling an illusion.
Entirely. They are prioritizing the comfort of a rebellious, wealthy class over the actual safety and survival of the vulnerable people in the building.
Hold on, I'm trying to wrap my head around the mentality here. If they know the prophecies and they see the danger coming, why wouldn't they just say something? Like, Is the text implying they literally don't believe their own warnings anymore, or are they just so arrogant they think the disaster won't affect them?
The text suggests it's a lethal combination of both, actually, and it's driven by a total loss of reverence. It points out that these shepherds know the ancient writings,
So they're educated.
highly educated. It's not an issue of ignorance. The problem, according to the author, is that they no longer tremble at the voice of Elohim.
They've lost the fear.
Right. They have become so familiar with the holy field that they treat it like a commodity. They see the corruption spreading, but they stay quiet because speaking up would threaten their position.
And it isn't just passive silence either. The source material accuses them of actively exploiting the people they're supposed to be guiding. Like, instead of tending to the flock, these leaders are basically slaughtering the sheep to eat the fat and wear the wool.
Exactly. It references Ezekiel 34, completely inverting the role of the shepherd.
Because being a shepherd back then was, what, dangerous work?
Oh, it was dirty, exhausting work. You're sleeping in the dirt, fighting off predators, constantly searching for lost animals, but these leaders have turned it into a luxury position.
They're just reaping the benefits.
Yeah. The text explicitly calls them out for failing to strengthen the weak, heal the sick, or gather the scattered. Instead, they rule with harshness and fear, extracting resources from the very people they should be serving.
Which means the sheep end up wandering all over the mountains. The leaders have entirely abandoned their duty of care.
And that failure of duty leads to the obvious question, why do it? Why take on the mantle of leadership if you have no intention of actually leading?
Right. If you see the sword coming, what exactly is the incentive to stay quiet?
Well, the author introduces a concept to explain this motive, calling it the way of Balaam.
Balaam, son of Beor.
Yes. Now, conceptually, Balaam was an ancient figure who had genuine spiritual insight. He knew the true voice, but he essentially became a prophet for hire.
Ah.
He forsook the straight path because he fell in love with what the text calls the wages of unrighteousness. He realized kings and rulers would pay him handsomely if he tailored his spiritual messages to align with their political goals.
Wait, so these aren't just complacent leaders. The text is accusing them of being actively complicit for profit. It sounds almost like ancient corporate lobbying.
It really does.
Like where truth is traded for institutional funding and political access.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text frames this as a systemic betrayal. The Last Witness claims that contemporary teachers are following that exact same playbook. They bow to the wages of power, they chase the gold of institutions, and they crave the favor of rulers and magistrates.
And they build temples of politics. I think that's the phrase used.
Yes, temples of politics.
That is a brutal phrase. It implies their actual religion is just power. The text claims they raise cattle for sacrifice and actively stir the nations into war.
Right, they secretly bring in destructive heresies.
They bless people with their lips, but their actual counsel brings a curse.
Because maintaining a massive temple, whether it's a literal megachurch, a political institution, or a massive academic endowment, it requires a massive amount of capital.
You got to keep the lights on.
Exactly.
Right.
And once your primary goal becomes keeping those lights on, you become a slave to the people writing the checks. You start compromising your message so you don't offend wealthy donors.
That dynamic is so recognizable today. But the text goes even further. It accuses these leaders of being gatekeepers. It mentions that by obsessing over titles and exalting their own specialized knowledge, they have taken away the key of knowledge. It references Luke 11.52, right? They refuse to enter the gate of true wisdom themselves, but they also actively hinder anyone else who's trying to get through.
And how do they hinder them? By making the path seem impossibly complex. They hide behind an endless, exhausting avalanche of empty books.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This part feels like a massive critique of institutional gatekeeping.
The Scroll of Empty Books is arguably the most relentless critique in this entire collection. It's a fundamental dismantling of academic pursuit that lacks any real spiritual reality.
Because it quotes Ecclesiastes 12.12, right, about how the making of many books has no end.
Yes, and that much study is a wearying of the flesh. These teachers multiply doctrines, they debate endlessly, publish endlessly, just treading the same path, conference after conference, sermon after sermon.
It's like someone having a PhD in the physics of swimming.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Like, they write dozens of books about fluid dynamics and the exact biomechanics of the freestyle stroke. They host these massive conferences to debate the molecular structure of water, but they absolutely refuse to actually jump in the pool.
That is spot on. They mistake gathered data about the water for the actual experience of swimming. The text insists that the reign of Elohim is not in word but in power, quoting 1 Corinthians 4:20.
Not in word, but in power.
Right. True wisdom is described as the actual breath of Yahuah living within a man. It's an active force that protects and gives life.
Whereas these compromised teachers are just, what does it call them? Springs without water.
Springs without water, clouds driven by a storm.
That is such a tragic image. You walk miles in the desert to get to a spring because you are dying of thirst. And when you arrive, it's just dry rocks.
They have all the outward appearance of holding sustenance, but they are completely empty inside. And the text draws this huge contrast between the early fathers who walked in the actual breath and authority of the Spirit and the current generation.
The current generation who just traded all that living energy for rigid systems.
Exactly. They are stuck in nostalgia. They look backward and ask, why were the former days better? Which, again, echoes Ecclesiastes. They flee from true wisdom, which the text says actually calls aloud outside in the open squares, like in Proverbs 1:20.
Because the systems they built are just incredibly comfortable. Even if the endless debates and the many books produce absolutely nothing of real value, it keeps the machinery moving.
It keeps the paychecks clearing.
Right. But the author claims that a person with a trained ear can hear the counterfeit. They can tell the difference between the true voice and the hollow system.
Which sets up an incredible tension. You have these hollow leaders hoarding power and silencing the alarms, and you have an increasingly restless flock starting to recognize the counterfeit.
Something has to give.
The friction is too high.
So we have silent shepherds, we have corrupt politicians in religious clothing, and we have empty scholars. Where does the last witness to this collision course end?
It ends in a fierce and impending divine judgment. The warning here is dire. The text declares that the day of Yahuah is near, and the judge of all the earth is rising to weigh every single shepherd, teacher, and prophet.
Because the shepherds scattered the flock.
Right.
The text says the shepherd of Israel himself is rising to do the job. He's going to search for his sheep and personally separate the faithful from the corrupt.
And this is not portrayed as a gentle intervention. The text describes Yahuah as a man of battle, quoting Exodus 15:3.
A man of battle.
Yeah. The appointed hour is written. The nations are enraged, wrath has come, and the time has arrived to destroy those who destroy the earth, which pulls directly from Revelation 11:18.
So what does this all mean? I want to ask a clarifying question here. The text specifically mentions destroying those who destroy the earth. Is this framed purely as a spiritual judgment, like in the afterlife? Or does the text imply that these corrupt political and religious systems are physically, materially destroying the world we live in?
This raises an important question. It's really both. The text points to Ecclesiastes 7:14, noting that Elohim has appointed both the day of prosperity and the evil day.
Okay.
The reckoning isn't just a future abstract concept. It's framed as an active, unavoidable consequence for leaders who have corrupted creation right now. They prioritize profit, they stir nations into war, they are actively destroying the earth.
So the destruction of these leaders is almost a necessary intervention to stop them from burning the house down.
Exactly. But amidst all this heavy judgment, the ultimate message is actually a desperate call to action. The author is urging these leaders to repent while the door of mercy is still open.
Because the voice in the wilderness is rising once more.
Yes, the true watchmen are waking up, and the text says the endless noise of these empty books of men will soon be silenced.
So to bring all these heavy themes together for you listening, we have explored a fiery, deeply prophetic proclamation today. We've looked at a text that relentlessly critiques leaders who choose the luxury of the penthouse and the safety of the institution over telling the hard truth. It exposes the way leaders substitute actual, living spiritual power with an endless, exhausting maze of academic debate. And it stands as a stark warning of an inescapable divine reckoning for those who mislead the vulnerable for their own gain.
And, even if you view this purely as an ancient literary or rhetorical text, it forces you to look at modern institutions and ask them tough questions.
Absolutely.
Are our leaders actually sounding the alarm when danger approaches? Or are they just comforting us to protect their own status and their own funding?
It really is the muted fire alarm all over again. The building might be actively burning, but the classical music playing in the lobby sure sounds nice.
It does.
And that leaves you with one final thread to pull on today. The text we explored claims that a trained ear can easily tell the difference between the true voice of wisdom and a hollow counterfeit. But look at the world we live in right now.
It's so loud.
We are overflowing with endless information, podcasts, opinions, and an infinite mountain of many books. So how exactly do you train your ear in the middle of all that? What is the actual difference between someone speaking hard, life-saving truths and someone who is just making a lot of loud, empty noise?
That is the big question.
Something for you to seriously mull over the next time you hear someone shouting from the watchtower. Keep digging, keep questioning. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.